So
Hi everyone. I want to.
9,
Am I
8,
live?
7, 6, 5,
Oui, vous êtes en ligne.
4.
Hi everyone. I'm Jacques Cousineau, head of sales at Novipro. I would like to welcome you to this session on network security. A bit of logistic before we jump in the presentation. The session today will last 30 minutes, the presentation, and we have a 15-minute question. So we have a hard stop at 10:30. I'm going to ask everyone to use SwapCard chat if you have any questions. We'll be monitoring your questions, and around 10:15, we'll be answering your questions as they come in. I will introduce you our guest speaker today. I would like to welcome Raoul Gashiap. Raoul is the VP GM for security at Arista Network and has a proven track record and established building disruptive technology. Raoul comes from Arista through the acquisition of Awake Security, where he served as CEO. Prior to Awake, Raoul was the global CTO at Silence, a pioneer of AI-based security. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Raoul to the presentation.
Good morning, good evening, everyone. It's great to be here. I am Rahul Kashyap, the VP GM of Awake Security at Arista Networks. And today I'll be talking about a lot of topics which are top of mind for a lot of us, which is ransomware, insider threats, supply chain attacks, some of which have really been aggravated in the last couple of years. And what I will bring here today in the conversation are real-world stories that we have come across with our incident response practice, where we have actually helped in several cases taking care of ransomware incidents and resolving them. And at the same time, lessons learned on how can you be proactive with incidents like ransomware. And then I also have some insider threats use cases and real world scenarios I'll talk about as well to kind of to explain the lessons learned there as well as what are the key takeaways and how do we move forward from here. So hopefully this will be an interesting conversation for all of you. Let's get started. So first of all, I've taken the example of Avadon, which is well known in the ransomware circles. This is an infection we came across recently. This is a pretty serious threat, and it's kind of a threat which has been growing in terms of when you talk about income of the attackers. The average ransom payment for this ransomware is approximately $300,000 US, and it's a 171 year-on-year increase, which means they are increasing and they're getting more aggressive in terms of asking for more amount of money in return of their ransomware keys. They typically target manufacturing, healthcare, education, and government. And this is probably one of the more, I would say, more aggressive ransomware gangs that's kind of operating in the underworld. They call out the competitors. They have done DDoS attacks. They call even the customers, and yeah, they use tactics which are pretty aggressive, for sure. Then I have one more use case of Maize, which has been also very active in the last year or so. We believe it's been used by nation-state attackers, and it's a very well-funded scheme, and it's been a very tough one to tackle by the entire industry as well. In fact, several months ago, the FBI sent out a warning to the private sector about the impact of Maize, and the actors here are also pretty malicious. They mean business, and if the ransom is not paid, all this data is actually released to public. And yeah, they want the attention. They like the attention, and they want to have and build a reputation that they are not the ones you want to mess with. A classic, I would say, scheme to keep people scared about not being hit by this gang. So the other piece we have learned after looking at some of these strains, and I call out Maize and Avadon just as an example. We have looked at several other, ransomware strains as well. First of all, the ransomware attackers just don't get in and attack and encrypt everything. There is a dwell time before the encryption. It can be typically around few days, less than a week typically. But this is the dwell time which is also getting shorter because they're getting more adept in getting in, compromising the victims, and then basically making sense of the network and what are the targets to encrypt, what not to, etc. So we typically advise people to have the SOC triad, properly called as where you have network monitoring, endpoint monitoring, and even the aggregation of logs. Many people particularly struggle on the network piece because they don't have good network monitoring capabilities. But if you have a well-established practice here, you might actually be able to thwart some of these ransomware attacks before they actually do a lot of damage. So it's very important to have investments in these areas for a ransomware prevention standpoint. So how does a ransomware attack work? So this is a kind of a graphic to explain a very typical ransomware attack. This is where the organization and the employee are basically they're data harvesting. In many cases, they will do a recon after an exploit is successful. They will look at which areas, which servers, what are the targets to go after. And once they get a hook into your environment, it could be a server, it could be a user who by mistake clicked on a link through a phishing, for example, expedition. Then they'll use the classic lateral movement to kind of get the initial compromise, establish a foothold to have persistence, try to escalate privileges. It helps in the particularly for ransomware strains. Then they start moving in laterally. They do an internal recon, and the whole aim is to maintain presence and have a C2 connection and have a strong foothold. And then typically after that, they will try to, if they are really an advanced threat actor, they will try to even use your legit tools, see if they can use your credentials and use several persistence techniques to make sure that they don't lose contact with the victim. After that, typically that's when they basically look at the encryption piece, typically. And they also are prepared with a lot of exfil data in case the ransom payment is not made. They threaten to make a lot of sensitive data public. And then, of course, they have a scheme well established to make the payments as well, depending upon what kind of cryptocurrency or what is their scheme for making the payments. So this is a kind of a very common, typical life cycle of an average ransomware infection. So, to really work around ransomware challenges, it's very important for us to leverage a host of available intelligence which is accessible to most of us, ranging from IOCs, the exploitation, what's really going on in the exploitation world, what are the most common exploits being used by ransomware gangs, the various tools being used, and also what kind of fishes are being targeted and which is escaping your phishing filters as well. So understanding this, sharing this information is very important. There are a lot of threat intel groups who are actively doing a lot of ransomware tracking. So we recommend being a part of that group. And you can also follow the Awake Labs team, which has built a lot of expertise as well in preventing ransomware infections. For IOCs, this is a classic example. I would say it's probably the most easiest one to go after. If you have a network monitoring tool like an network detection response NDR solution, you can load up your IOCs and quickly scan and see if there is a hit. This is probably a very quick and easy way to know if there was a ransomware strain in your network. And you'll be surprised, many people don't even know about what's really going on deep in their networks. So this is an easy one to go after, and it's recommended to start with this if you're doing a threat hunt looking for ransomware. Then there's the next piece is the initial access. This is where we follow the MITRE framework here, which actually breaks down the various techniques. And we also find several network early warning signs, particularly looking at suspicious C2, doppelganger domains. This continues to be the favorite for most attackers. I'll talk about that in a bit in my next slide. Inbound RDP from external sources. If you are not expecting or you don't have a lot of RDP connections, suddenly you get an inbound, that is something very serious and suspicious. You should be very, very careful about that. We are seeing a lot of ransomware coming through RDP. Obviously, you have to have good hygiene, unencrypted passwords. If any of that, if the attackers get hold of, you are in trouble for sure. Next, phishing and domains. This is kind of an important piece where we always continue to find that attackers tweak and play with the typo squatting domains as well as the doppelganger domains to launch the attacks and leverage that for C2 as well. So you should be actively hunting for these type of domains because they are very likely being abused. And your network NDR network tool can be a very good place to query and search for these kind of domains as well. It's highly recommended that you start and query and make it like a regular search in your network to make sure that nobody is trying to tweak or use your legit domains and take advantage of that, because those can be used in attacks like these later on. RDP has been a top intrusion vector for many ransomware gangs actually, and they have actually this kind of gives them a lot of good access, and kind of also is like a legit tool, and they kind of tend to go under the radar. So this is something which we highly recommend from Awake Labs to be very careful about. This is something where, and if you're seeing a brute force going after your network connections, you should definitely do a deeper investigation. It could be something much bigger behind the scenes when somebody is targeting you. We continue to see that a lot of people ignore some of these brute force attacks, and it really gives the attacker a very stronghold initial access. So it's very important to keep that in mind. Next is the data encryption and C2 and how do you exfil data and so on. So first of all, you have to have a continuous monitoring in your network of how do you are you really watching out for C2s? How do you make sure that so you have to have a SOC team which is really focused on actively looking at C2s. And some of these can be buried in the noise. So we have kind of broken this out into certain protocols which are commonly being used by some of these gangs. Look out for ICMP and SSH tunnels. These are kind of the obvious ones to look out for and see where they're coming from, where they're going. And hard-coded IP addresses. Watch out for those which are rare to the environment. You can do some advanced algorithmic analysis of all your network traffic and see, can you identify those? And if you suddenly find large file transfers, you should watch out for those as well. So all of this can be pre-programmed in a good network detection response solution, and it can be also automated as well. And of course, if I'm talking about C2s, I can't forget Cobalt Strike beacons. A lot of the attackers continue to use Cobalt Strike because they have been designed to be evasive, mostly designed for pen testing, but actually also being used by some of the attackers in real world scenarios. So yeah, looking out for C2 and having a real dedicated effort will pay you a lot of value and dividends. You may save a lot of time and effort later on as a part of your overall ransomware strategy. So I think the most important part, kind of, I want to summarize here is there are enough signals. We always look at ransomware as an after the fact effect, but given the fact that we know that it takes few days, it is imperative to know that you can actually really be ahead of the game if you have proactive monitoring available on your network, and you are leveraging your EDR solutions and your log solutions as a joint powerful solution. And we have worked on several cases of these type as well in the real world. Last but not the least, we've kind of been tracking various of these ransomware strains, and we found that not surprisingly they use Onion for the exfiltration of data. So if you have a threat hunting team, you should identify some of these mitigation, some of these warning signs, and have a mitigation strategy in place. And you will be surprised that there's a lot of trails, there's a lot of available known resources, IOCs available, which can very reliably identify and potentially prevent a large ransomware impact to your organization. We have a lot of blogs and analysis for these. At Awake Security, we have been tracking pretty much most of the key ransomware threat actors and strains, and we regularly analyze them. So feel free to reach out to the Awake Security blog and contact us if you have any questions. So that's about ransomware. And as I was starting my talk, I had promised that we'll talk a little bit about ransomware and insider threats. So let's go to the next piece of my presentation, which is focus on insider threats. So the interesting statistic here before I start, 80% of insider threats actually stem from these three common scenarios: departing employees, company reorgs, and employees with access to your high value assets. In many cases, those are files. And as per the Verizon data breach investigation report, like more than 1/3 of the data breaches involve internal actors. So this is something which you have to be really well aware of and have to be prepared on dealing with these scenarios. So we have done some analysis. We have actually had several cases. I'll talk about some case studies which we came across in the last few months to give you a sense of the kind of insider threat scenarios we are seeing in the real world. So this is an interesting one. So this was the US company acquired a small firm, and the employees at the smaller firm found out that the company was going to lay them off. And what they did was, as a retaliation, they took control of a key server and literally held it hostage. See, the acquired company was a Russian entity, made up mostly for programmers, and as a result, all the US administrators, they were all logged out from the system, and they had only weekly backups. And third-party forensic investigators were brought in this environment to basically see what to do. But as a result of this, the system and the business was offline for several days. They were literally held hostage. So this is something which we helped to one of our clients to mitigate and ultimately figure out the root cause, who was holding the entire company hostage, essentially. Next case study is another interesting one. This was a media company. They were suspecting that the director of IT was reading all of their emails, and the company hired a third party to find out if this is indeed true, and are there any sensitive emails being read. So we were involved in doing a full third-party risk assessment, and we kind of divulged a lot of interesting information and insight. and then basically it was identified that yes, the suspect was actually indeed infringing on his contract and reading sensitive emails which he was not supposed to. He wiped out his system, and we found all the details of all the activities stored in the system and all the networking artifacts as well. So a case was being built against this individual, and basically, obviously the individual was let go as a result of this investigation as well. So this is another good example where somebody has access to a lot of sensitive data and they are abusing their power and authority. And we continue to see this now and then as we do third-party assessments as well. So it's very important to understand the intent of insider threats. What is the motivation? Why does this happen? A lot of us are professionals, and some people continue to get very surprised when they come across these issues. So I've broken this out into like 4 categories. First of all, it could be just negligence. You have bad judgment, and in the past, your IT team has not been very responsive, and there is no clear security awareness training. There are some cases we do come across where people stumble upon stuff which they did not intend to, and it is negligence on probably both parties, more so on the IT administrator in this case. Collusive, where you are working with a malicious threat external actor. It's very hard to detect these kind of insider threats because they may be well versed. It's almost like a plant in your organization with a malicious intent. These are the hardest ones to identify, and it would take a lot of time and investigation to really confirm issues like these type. Malicious, sometimes this is basically where you may have a personal or financial gain. You may have you might have something to vent against your company, like a disgruntled employee, or you may have you may want to sabotage the intellectual property or something of value to the company as well. So there is malicious intent there as well. So we see a lot of those, and a couple of those use cases I mentioned actually cover those as well. We see this to be the most common one that we come across. Then then obviously there's always a risk, when it comes to third party and contractors. We forget that a lot of contractors have a lot of access. Many times you will see that the access is not well monitored or managed. So they are an insider threat as well. So you have to treat every third party contractor as a as a high risk insider threat. People don't think of them as insider threat, but the reality is that if they have access to all your sensitive data and environment, they are as good as your insider threat. So so these are some of the motivations. So what we have done is kind of really understanding the personality type of an insider threat. What is the motivation? And you have to kind of, if you're doing an investigation of this type, you kind of have to understand where, in which of these quadrants, if I may, does the insider reside? Is he the indifferent? Is he oblivious? Is he completely innocent? Is he angry? Or is it truly evil? And this is kind of this kind of quadrant helps you break down to really understand the psychology of the insider threat and really how to work through this. Because in these scenarios, you may have to work differently, kind of very similar to a hostage crisis scenario, right? Although this is obviously a very different scope. But the psychology of this is important to be understood. That's why we try to kind of break it out in this format so that people really try to understand what's really going on, why, and what's and how do you really circumvent that. So talking about disgruntled insiders, this is probably something which I mentioned is we come across the most. So I wanted to call this out. There are enough warning signs which actually happen more so on your network, which are very visible, which a lot of us ignore typically on an average day. Like for example, a temporary outage due to a service account being reset. Then suddenly, there's a scheduled task which is being run to reset the passwords. The PowerShell script is being sent over an SMB protocol to two domain controllers. So if you see stuff like this, you will see that there will be something going on there behind the scenes, and you will ultimately be able to point out to the employee in this case, where we were able to correlate all of that information that we saw on the wire and pinpointed that to a specific employee. Furthermore, there were multiple RDP collections. And then the employee basically tried to shut down all the web applications via a backdoor. So this was a scenario where we actually were able to see pretty much all of this behavior profile literally being created by an employee who was disgruntled, and he was actually sending signals on the wire on the network. So these are important ones to watch out for. And you'll be surprised to see that if you correlate all of this information and kind of create a playbook, particularly if your environment or if you think there's going to be an org change or some of the aspects I mentioned which could trigger off behaviors like these, it's very important to be prepared and have your security SOC team or your managed service provider to be vigilant and start tracking these proactively. Next piece is, a very important part of insider threat is working with law enforcement, and this is something which we have been involved with as well as we continue to work on these scenarios. First of all, a lot of important aspects when you're dealing with a scenario like this. Chain of custody and preserving it is very important. You should be able to, if you want to prosecute, if you think that this threat is critical enough for your organization to pursue and prosecute, it's very important to have the forensic artifacts and data available to build a case. And remember, a user account and device is not a person. You have to be able to generate and have a detailed report showing time, location, evidence, timeline, all the behaviors, and this has to be done in a secure manner as well. It can take several weeks or even months to build a case and work with law enforcement if you really want to make a solid case with real evidence. So it's a lot of work. This is also a good time to invite and bring in experienced incident response professionals who can actually help you work with the law enforcement. But it's important not to forget law enforcement as well, because getting law enforcement in at the right time. First of all, make sure that in case some real big damage was done by the insider, you are informing law enforcement proactively. In many cases, you may have to do this if you're a public company, depending upon the extent of the damage done. But so we highly recommend that you do work closely with your law enforcement teams in your local areas and so on, because this also sends a clear message to all the other employees that you take these intrusions very seriously. Next, we have a lot of information available. We have been working on these environments, particularly insider threats for the last several years now. Have done several breach studies. I have pointed out a few links which are again available on our blog to kind of go after and look at some of these detailed case studies. I very briefly mentioned some of these today in my presentation, but the important key takeaway is insider threats happen. They are more prevalent than we all realize and think. And in some cases, a lot of damage can be done. So it's very important to have a continuous monitoring, particularly on the network for insider threats, to really correlate the behaviors and the outliers of what's really going on in your network. And you know and you can definitely reach out to the Awake team if we can help you in any of these. If you have any problems of this type, we're happy to help you and you know educate you from our experiences of real world situations of these type. So with this ransomware and insider threats, those are my couple of take key areas I wanted to focus on today's conversation. Thank you for joining the talk. It was a pleasure, and talk to you also. Thank you very much.
So welcome back, everyone. And Raul, thank you for enlightening us on network security. A couple of questions came in, and I welcome everyone to send your question through the chat. As we go through them, we'll answer them. First question that came in, Raul, is the RDP widely open on the internet? Has COVID increased this?
Yes, we do continue to see a lot more attacks coming through our RDP, particularly during COVID times, and the reason for that is a combination of shadow IT. You know, a lot of people were not set up well to work remotely, and suddenly they were forced to actually go and use their machine. So they thought it was convenient to have RDP exposed, and they can log in remotely from their homes and go to their office computers sometimes. So we saw several instances of that across the board, from small even to large companies. That trend seems to be declining in the last few months as people are forcing better hygiene. But this was something which was really prevalent and at its peak during the COVID times.
Okay, thank you. Another question, can Awake technology detect IoT devices and help to detect inside threats?
Yes, so one of the things that the Arista NDR or the Awake technology brings is we try to detect every device. So we are not IP address based, and that's very helpful because IP addresses are cheap. You go from one building to another, your IP address will change. You switch networks, your IP addresses will change. Not to forget the DHCP lease and so on. So what we do is we try to fingerprint your device and remember it like a muscle memory, so that even if you come later, we can immediately identify the user using the device. So if you're a threat hunter, that's very beneficial because you're not just chasing IP addresses, you're looking at IP address, a device profile, and you typically know who that user is on that on the device as well. So there's a lot of context, added behind the scenes, and that's very helpful from a threat analysis, threat detection point of view. So there's a big focus of actually identifying devices, including IoT devices. So the Awake technology can do that, and in fact, we are actually one of the pioneers in doing device identification just by passively looking at network traffic. We don't need any integrations like Active Directory and so on to be able to identify a device reliably. And I think the next question was about detecting insider threats. Yes, as you would imagine, that's one of our core strengths. Some of the examples I mentioned previously in my talk earlier were classic examples of insider threats, and those are pretty much lessons we learned right in the ground, which I kind of shared a couple of examples. So yeah, insider threats is a big concern for a lot of people, and they are, depending on the profile I mentioned of the kind of insider threat you're dealing with, they can be very hard to analyze and detect reliably. So that's an area where a solution like a network detection response can really help to identify threats of those nature.
Good. Another question came in. Today, the cloud and on-prem environments are getting siloed from a security perspective. Does Arista NDR helps with these threats?
Yeah, so this is actually a very relevant question because, and we actually found some very interesting examples. I'll give you an example of this. First of all, what's happening is there's a major push towards the cloud, and then on top of it, you still have a lot of assets on-prem. People still have offices, people still have laptops there, inside those offices and so on. To give you one example, we found recently where somebody had targeted a large organization and sprayed them with malicious Chrome extensions, which were designed to basically grab user credentials. And so they harvested the credentials, and they found some of the AWS, the external cloud credentials as a function of that. And then they used to basically go and log into their AWS infrastructure and brute force them because they had harvested those credentials. So we're seeing attacks like those where people are taking advantage of the fact that you have monitoring only on-prem or only in the cloud, and there's a disjoint between the two. So I call it the new hybrid attacks. These are beginning. What I call you was what I just mentioned was not as sophisticated. I'm sure there'll be a lot more sophistication coming in as the attackers try to leverage that. And this is kind of what we try to bring together as well with the NDR, is kind of bring the visibility for both the cloud as well as the on-prem together in a single pane of glass, so that you have the context, you have the relevancy, you know who's logging in and who should not be, so that it's much more meaningful, particularly for people who are in the cloud journey, particularly people who are going towards the cloud from an on-prem environment. And we see a lot of customers in that journey right now. So this is a very important aspect, and I think it's kind of being ignored and missed by a lot of solutions in the market. But and this is kind of where attackers are beginning to leverage and take advantage of.
Thank you. Another question came in. I got hit by ransomware as my employee clicked a malicious link that got us infected. Is this an insider threat?
Interesting. So typically, insider threats are where there's a malicious intent by the insider. It's in some cases he could be a trained adversary by a nation state or a competitor, or he just malicious intent and he's trying to sell secrets from your inside office to outside, right? I wouldn't categorize people being hit by being hit by ransomware as insider threats, although it is also our responsibility, we are, as the citizens of the organization, to be very vigilant and mindful. In some cases, I just see people just being careless, and that leads to a lot of damage to the corporate assets and their colleagues as well. So I would say it's kind of bordering insider threat, but not really quite there, depending upon how much education the person has taken and due diligence done. I think education is very important for people to understand, not to click on links which they don't trust, or links which have too good to be true offers. Some people still fall for those. So yeah, I would say that I would still not call a victim of ransomware as an insider threat. I would just call them to be careless, but be mindful that what you're doing has consequences on the internet for a lot of people. So it's very important to be careful and mindful of how you behave when it comes to external links and so on.
Good advice. I don't see any more question. I'll just throw it back. If anybody has a question, just write it in the chat. If not, that will conclude our session today. And I want to thank you. Thanks everyone for participating, and also thank you, Raul, for the session today. It was enlightening, as I was mentioning earlier. I will also invite everyone, if you guys want to go back and see and have more questions, I invite you guys to the Arista booth available on the SwapCard platform all day. By all means, go see. These guys are there to answer your questions. Any more questions? If not, again, we'll conclude this session. And thanks, Raul. Thanks again.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Yeah, it's appreciated.